I said right at the beginning, right from day one, from the 16th of March, I remember, I said, this will not work unless the government guarantees 100% of these loans, because the banks will not want to take that 20% risk. Fortunately, our banks and our financial institutions and our financial structure are in a much, much stronger place than we were in 2007, 2008, 2009, because at that time we had light touch regulations. We had banks that had not built up enough reserves. We had a merry-go-round between the FSA and the Treasury and the Bank of England. It was great in the good times, but in the bad times it became a blame-go-round. Now we have far better regulation and supervision with clear roles for the Bank of England and for the Treasury, as well as the regulators. So I think we're in a much stronger position. The banks are much better capitalized, and I think we've got robust financial situations, whereas then it was a threat of our whole financial system collapsing. Now the threat is of our whole economy and of our businesses. But I still say these banks will not want to take the risk of that 20%. And I know that from experience, because some of you may have had during the growth of your business the government small firms loan guarantee scheme loans, now called the enterprise guarantee scheme, where the government guarantees, in my time, 75% to 85% of the loan, with the bank taking the other 25 to 15% exposure. And I remember I had to go from bank to bank to bank to try and get these loans. And they were really difficult to get because the banks didn't want to take that exposure. But with that experience, I said to the government from day one, this will not work. And sure enough, a month down the road, the scheme's been in existence since the 23rd of March for 3.5 weeks now. And the last figures, so we'll get a more update, I'm sure, today, but the last figures that I know of, 6,000 companies have got these loans for just over £1 billion out of £330 billion in total that is meant to go out to businesses under the guarantee scheme. And initially, the banks were trying to ask for personal guarantees. And the good thing is the government has, throughout this process, from the time the first measures were announced a month ago, the government has been listening. The government has been working with major business organizations like the CBI, where I'm vice president, with the FSB, the Federation of Small Businesses, the Federation of British Industry. It is listening. It is working with us collaboratively. And I have hats off to Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, and for the way that the government has acted quickly, acted in a big way. And also, if you look at it in terms of percentage of GDP, our measures in scale are right up there in the world. So I cannot criticize the government for the measures they've taken, the rapidity with which they've taken those measures. And the good thing is that they are willing to listen. So initially, they said this, but we said, now what about the employees? We have the employee guarantee scheme, the furlough scheme, where the government has said any company can have up to £2,500 a month, 80% of an employee's salary, the government will pay for. And that is now, from next Monday, companies can actually register and claim that money. And that goes back to the 1st of March. And anyone employed, it was originally anyone employed until the 28th of February. It's now been changed to anyone employed until the 19th of March. And we can claim for March, April, May for 3 months. And that furlough scheme is there. And this is really important because it's to try and prevent us as companies making people redundant, keeping our employees, so that when we can open up again, they can start working again. It's at the moment very rigid. You have to be furloughed for a minimum of 3 weeks. You can come back after 3 weeks. When you're on furlough, you can't work at all. And in many ways, that's being found to be quite impractical because companies do want to keep in touch with their employees while they're on furlough. Maybe they could do a little bit of part-time work to help out, but they're not allowed to. So it's very cut and dry at the moment, the furlough scheme, and that is a criticism of it. And we're working with the government to see if that can be improved at all. There is another danger, which is today is a deadline, wherein if this is not extended beyond the 31st of March, companies that employ large numbers of people can give notice if they want to make people redundant. They have to give 45 days notice. and that has to be from, in effect, today. So there was that insecurity that if the government doesn't increase the furlough scheme beyond the 31st of May, beyond the 30th of June, 31st of May, sorry, if those 3 months are not increased, then will companies be able to afford to keep on employees from the 1st of June onwards, when we have the uncertainty, will business be anywhere back to normal by then? And if not, how will the business survive? The government is not committing to that yet. The practical answer to it is that the notice can be given by these companies. We cannot stop that. But if the government then extends the furlough scheme, those redundancy notices, of course, can be withdrawn by the companies. So it's not an ideal situation, but that is another problem with the furlough scheme. But on the whole, it's great. And the other thing is it's costing a huge amount of money. It's costing over £10 billion per month. For these 3 months, it's over £42 billion cash out for the government. And please remember, the government loan guarantee schemes are guarantees. Hopefully, the companies that take out those loans will get their money. The banks will get their money back, and the government will not have to use that guarantee. The banks will not have to use the guarantee from the government. So it's the 330 billion is the absolute downside of every company that's been lent the money goes bust. It's not going to happen. So going back to the 45 million pound and under, only 6,000 companies and 1.1 billion, and over 300,000 inquiries have been made. It's not working. And I'm putting a lot of pressure, as are others, saying, please change it to 100% guarantee and the money will flow through. And I'm hopeful the government will listen, particularly as Germany and Switzerland are both offering 100% guaranteed loans. And the state aid rules were at one stage a blockage, the EU state aid rules. And we are still in the transition period, so we have to obey those rules. They have now been changed, whereas earlier they prevented the government from guaranteeing more than 80%. The state aid rules have been changed so that government can guarantee loans of up to 800,000 euros for banks lending, but up to 800,000 euros. And Germany and Switzerland have got schemes of around 500,000 euros equivalent, where it's 100% guaranteed. And the Swiss method is fantastic, where you have to answer just a few questions. It's 6 questions, and they guarantee to give the money within 48 hours. And I know of a company that I've dealt with, they've managed to get the loan within 12 hours. And of course, you make declarations, and those are legal declarations you're making. And on that, the loans are made. So if Switzerland can do it, if Germany can do it, why can't we? And in America, the vast majority of over 250 billion pounds worth of loans to small businesses has already been taken up. And here we are sitting at just over 1 billion being taken up. I'm sorry. The companies desperately need this money. I hear story after story every single day, many times a day, business saying, crying out saying, I'm not getting the loan. Some of them don't even get a reply from the banks. Whereas if the money would flow through, we should have a £500,000 and below, 100% guaranteed by the government. And maybe we can't do the 48 hours like the Swiss do, but it has to be given within a week. Now that, you wait and see how the money will then flow through to the companies that genuinely need it. And there's no question, the government's also listened to any personal guarantees under £250,000. The banks cannot ask for personal guarantees. And at the moment, they can only ask for the 20% above £250,000. But that'll all go if it's £100,000 guaranteed loan. So that 100% guaranteed. So I think that is one big aspect, is if we can unlock the Siebels, it'll be phenomenal in terms of business getting cash. Because you think about a business now, my business, Cobra Beer, we supply over 6,000 restaurants and bars. All of them are shut. So the on-trade that makes up over 2/3 of my business is dead. I have no income from that at all. At least I can supply some of the supermarkets, albeit on a scaled down production, because we can't operate our breweries at full capacity at a time like this. Our supermarket sales are ticking over, so we've got some business. There are some restaurants that are keeping open to do some takeaways, but the vast majority, business has stopped. So in that situation, there is help from the government. So they can get the furlough scheme. We then said the self-employed people are not covered. There's an equivalent of the furlough scheme for self-employed people that can get up to £2,500 a month with profits of up to £50,000 a year. And that scheme is also an equivalent for self-employed. So that is there. But then we said, what about charities? They've been left out. The government listened. We've now got £750 million of help for the charities. Now, arguably, it could be and should be much more than that, but at least it's a start, and the government has listened. But then we said, what about the startups? What about the tech companies? What about the VC-backed companies who are making losses, who do not come under the under 45 million Siebels scheme? They have where they're going to get the support from. Well, we're working on that. We're going to try and institute a 3 I's that was set up after the war, a government-backed, supported by the private sector investment scheme, a multi-billion investment scheme needs to be set up urgently to get money to the startups. And this country 30 years ago was not a country that was an entrepreneurial country. This country today is respected around the world as one of the most entrepreneurial countries in the world. This country is respected for our innovation, for our technology, for having the best universities in the world along with the United States of America. London is one of the most entrepreneurial cities in the world. And I think we really cannot lose that. And these startups, growth companies, smaller companies need the help. And that fund needs to come in as soon as possible. The other aspect of it is, of course, rates. Hospitality, retail are getting a rates holiday for 1 year. That's helping restaurants, for example, hugely. Then the ability to get grants for the under 51,000 rateable value, they can get £25,000 of grant. For under £15,000 or rates-free companies, they can get a £10,000 grant. Then rents is a huge problem. Landlords are chasing retail outlets and restaurants for rent. Now the government has said you cannot throw out a tenant for 3 months, but that doesn't stop a landlord if it's a bullying type of company. And I've heard many stories again of landlords who are saying, fine, we can't throw you out for 3 years, but that doesn't stop us from issuing a winding up order and putting a lot of pressure on restaurants that are completely closed, that have no income. And so that's a challenge. And of course, the landlord's argument is they have mortgages to pay from the investments to be able to rent the property out. So they need the money to pay their mortgage payments. So the knock-on effect of this crisis, the domino effect, is a demand crisis, a supply crisis, and a domino effect right through the supply chain and right around the world. Many of the Indian restaurants, curry restaurants, are owned and run by Bangladeshis, the vast majority, over 2/3 of them. And the High Commissioner of Bangladesh regularly is in touch with me saying, look at the retail outlets over here that have cancelled their orders for fashion. And garment exports is a huge proportion of Bangladesh's economy and exports. And millions of workers have sadly now lost their jobs because the contracts have just been cancelled because the retail outlets over here are shut. So it's a global knock-on effect, and it's absolutely tragic. Looking ahead, one of the things I've been pushing for a long time, because I've nearly lost my business 3 times, and the last time, which was during the financial crisis, one of our creditors put in a winding up order right in the middle of a restructuring scheme, and we had no protection. We didn't have the equivalent of a Chapter 11, which America has. And I've been since then saying we need to have an equivalent of Chapter 11 so that if a company is in trouble and in distress and needs some time to restructure and reorganize, it needs that breathing space from creditors. And now the good news is the government is committed. Once Parliament starts next week, albeit as a virtual Parliament, we are going to have legislation to bring in the equivalent of Chapter 11, which sadly will be needed very much in the coming months, but also in the long term. So that's the VAT again. You can delay a quarter's VAT and pay it later. If you're paying a self-assessment due on the 31st of July, you can delay it till the end of, till January. So there's a lot of help. The government is going out of its way to help, but there's still some big gaps, and they need to work on these gaps now and urgently. So I hope I've covered the majority of the schemes, and I'm just checking through the insurance is another area where a lot of companies who've taken out insurance are finding it very difficult to get the insurance companies to pay out because COVID-19 is not one of the diseases covered in in policies. There are various ways and clauses where insurance companies are trying not to pay, although we're putting pressure that it's the spirit that they should be following. A company cannot be accused of wrongful trading. That's also been brought in by the government, which is of help. And then before I conclude and open up for questions, I want to address, of course, before that, QE, the quantitative easing, straight off the bat, again, to the government's credit, Bank of England put in £200 billion worth of quantitative easing. Straight off the bat, the Bank of England brought down the interest rates to 0.1%, the lowest level since the Bank of England was founded in 1694. So these are huge measures that have been taken. And if you take the cost of everything that's taking place now, we then, of course, had the OBR projections. And the Office of Budget Responsibility projections, of course, they say they're not forecasts and they say they're not projections, but whatever you want to call them, it's their view of what could happen looking ahead. And their projections are based on a 3-month lockdown. So the lockdown going all the way through to June. And it says if that happens, we're going to have a really serious situation. 35%, a drop of 1/3 of GDP in 1 quarter, and the GDP dropping by 13% in a year. It'll have government expenditure going up to over £1 trillion. That's over 50% of our GDP. And these are huge figures. It'll have borrowing going well over 100%. Even the IMF has forecast that the UK GDP for this year will be as low as 6.5%, 7%, and the world GDP will drop by 3%. I mean, this is a global phenomenon. America now, we've got over 22 million people that have claimed unemployment benefit. You can see the universal credit claims over here have gone up well over 1 million already. People have sadly already lost their jobs. There are many small different sectors. Today I heard that the building sector, over 2/3 of the small builders in the construction industry, they don't have money beyond June. Households are dipping into their savings. This is punishing our whole country because we have to do it. We have no choice but to do it. And the government is doing everything it can to help businesses survive and get through this. How do we, with the medical side of things, how do we actually look at that side of things? And sorry, just before I do that, I've missed one aspect, which is the squeeze middle. Government listened again there, and between 45 million and the investment grade, there's a big gap, and you probably saw the announcement today where companies with a turnover of 250 million pounds, between 45 and 250 can get up to 25 million pounds loan, 80% guaranteed by the government, and above 250 million pounds can get a 50 million pound loan guaranteed by the government. So even the squeeze middle has now been addressed by the government. So one more aspect, and then we'll open up to questions, and that is overall looking at the health situation. We have hospital capacity, which was the one big issue where we had to go into the lockdown so that the illness didn't spread to the extent that the NHS wouldn't be able to cope. And what we've had there now is I think this country doing phenomenally well in rising to the challenge, with the Nightingale hospitals being the best example. And the message there is collaboration. So not just the NHS with the Army, with the Gurkhas, with the University of East London, with the private sector, the Excel Centre, within 9 days, setting up a critical care hospital with 500 beds straight away up to 4,000 beds. And now this is being replicated across the country with thousands of beds, including in Birmingham and right across the country. So we've shown the ability collaboratively to work and do that. PPE, tragic, absolutely tragic, the shortage of PPE that we've had in the NHS sector. Ventilators, we had a huge shortage. The target is 18,000 ventilators, and private sectors come and try to help as well with importing ventilators, and we'll hopefully get to that 18,000 very soon. The care sector, it's just come out that the care sector, the deaths from the care sector were not being concluded in the figures, which I find tragic. The way the care sector staff, 1.5 million of them, dealing with 500,000 people in care homes and 500,000 people roughly in approximate numbers at home, doing such hard work, getting paid very little, and having hardly any PP, and not even being tested. When I had my illness, I couldn't get tested on the 15th of March. And I found out that even NHS staff themselves couldn't get tested. Now NHS staff are being tested. Care home staff have not been able to be tested. Now care home staff, the attention has been brought to the care sector. The staff will be tested. Care home patients were going to hospital, and some of them being sent back to the care homes without being tested. So now we're going to have testing for the staff, attention on the care homes, testing in the care homes. And testing is a big issue. Germany has been testing 500,000 a week. They've been testing 100,000 a day weeks ago. We've got a target to reach 100,000 tests a day by the 30th of April in 2 weeks' time. We're not testing 20,000 a day at the moment. We need mass scale testing for patients, for the NHS, for the care sector, and for the whole country. The antigen tests, the swab tests, to show whether you've got the illness or not. And ideally, later down the road, we do need those antibody tests, which will show you that you have had the illness and hopefully some immunity. So the testing needs to be ramped up in a massive way. And one of the reasons I believe it was not happening is because it's been controlled centrally and not opened up. Now you've got collaborative work with laboratories, the universities, research centers, the private sector. Our pharmaceutical companies are some of the best in the world, all working together to ramp up testing in a big way. The next aspect is drug trials. We have existing drugs that are being repurposed to treat COVID-19, to treat the viral aspect of COVID-19, and also, when it goes too far, the inflammatory aspect, which is very dangerous. And that is, sadly, what quite often will lead to death, is if the inflammatory takes over when a person is critically ill. So the drugs for both areas, there are drugs that exist, including the one that everyone talks about, hydroxychloroquine, but there are many others. And there are tests going on in this country at rapid pace. And the Cambridge University call that I attended today said that they are very hopeful that these antiviral, as well as the anti-inflammatory, something will come out of there. And if something comes out of there that can be, and these are drugs that are already approved, that are on the market, that would need to be scaled up in production, a lot of it will come from countries like India, for example, which has a huge pharmaceutical industry, including our own pharmaceutical industry over here. And I think that will be a game changer, because then you can prevent, hopefully, the deaths and the really critical illness can be prevented. And I think that will be a game changer. And of course, the ultimate game changer will be a vaccine. The most optimistic outcome of a vaccine at speed is an academic at Oxford who thinks that she has a vaccine that can be ready to go into production by the end of September. If that happens, it'll be a miracle. Other companies like AstraZeneca are working with Sanofi, so you've got international collaboration between competitors. They feel they can get a vaccine possibly by next year. So 18 months would be, even in a normal vaccine, would be phenomenal. But again, as the Cambridge academic said today, there is no guarantee a vaccine will ever happen, because look at HIV, for example. 3 decades later, there is no vaccine. Dengue fever, there is no vaccine. So it's not necessarily the reality that we will have a vaccine. Hopefully we will, but it's not definite. So that's the situation that we have. And if we can get this R below 0, under 0.5, if we can flatten and reduce this curve, then we can start opening things up. And that opening up, I believe, will happen in a phased manner. That phased manner will be over in perhaps 3-week stages. An academic, Gerard Lyons, who used to be Boris Johnson's chief economist when he was mayor, who I've known for many years, he's written a paper and called it a traffic light system, red, amber, green. So the red phase, when you start opening up smaller shops, you allow people to start going out more, but keeping social distancing. And the next phase, you allow that opening up to be in a wider scale. Even if it's restaurants, it'll be sitting at social distancing. And then the final stage is when you allow bigger gathering and bigger events to take place. And it depends on, again, the constant health monitoring of the disease throughout those phases as to how things can open up. So the most optimistic in that scenario is we start opening up by the end of June. That's the most optimistic. And then you get other scientists saying we're going to be in this for many months to come. And those are the two extremes of the prediction. So at that stage, I will stop and start taking questions. I think I've covered what I want to do at this stage.
Thank you very much, Lord Billamoria. That was really informative and some great advice for our audience. We've had lots of questions come in, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. The first one is from Richie, who asked, I've heard that the loan scheme has not really helped many small businesses, with very few loans being accepted. How can this be improved?
Well, thank you, Richie. Good to have you on the call. Richie has a great business called the School of Marketing. So great online marketing lessons and others. So I commend what you're doing. The answer to that is very simple. I think if the government listens to what I've been saying, and others are now saying more and more, the whole of last weekend's press, every day it's now in the press, people calling out to the government to listen and increase the guarantee to the banks to 100%, and then the money will start flowing. And believe you me, and the majority of the loans under the 45 million level, even if you look at the moment, it's £1 billion and 6,000 companies. So these are not loans of millions of pounds. There'll be loans for small amounts, £50,000, £100,000. So if you have a £500,000 ceiling, and that means you don't breach any state aid rules, it gives a buffer between 800,000 and 500,000, 800,000 euros and 500,000, so that if a company is getting rates relief, if it's getting any grants, that can all be in that buffer. And I think that 500,000 ceiling, 100% guaranteed by the government, will unlock this. And you watch, billions of pounds will go out to the companies that desperately need the cash now, today. Wish Rishi Sunak would listen. I wish Alok Sharma would listen and make this happen today.
The next one is from Bertie. Will there be any safety net except universal credit for people who became freelancers in the past 6 months?
This is a really, if you're a freelancer, you're not eligible to you're not employed by anyone, so you can't get the employee scheme. If you file tax returns under the self-employed basis, and you have returns to go back, you can get up to £50,000, the £2,500 or 80%. That is available, but otherwise there really isn't much. Unfortunately, one has to it's the universal credit that's the only thing one can go for at this stage. It's and it's a chance to keep saying I cannot help everybody. I'm trying my best.
Okay, the next question that's come in is anonymous. It says, do you think normal life will be drastically different once the pandemic crisis is over?
The big word there's over. You know, what is over? And when is it actually over? So if you take the very pessimistic, cautious view of the future, is that there could be a second wave, and until a vaccine is found, this could flare up at any time, in which case there could be more lockdowns down the road. In that sort of a scenario, it's not over for a while. I mean, 1 or 2 scientists have said this is not going to be over for 18 months. Now, personally, I don't believe that. I believe that it will be phased out. I mean, the most optimistic is there's some weather effect. Now, that's not been proven scientifically at all. The weather gets warmer, normally flus and infections like flus and colds are much less in warmer weather in the summer. They build up again in the winter. So I think that's another optimistic hope and a wish that is not scientifically proven. That will this in some way abate as we get into the summer? We don't know, because it's the first time the world has experienced this virus. So I don't know when it's over, but let's assume in the best case scenario, by June, things start getting back to normal. If that's the case, I don't see it as a switch that's gone off that suddenly switched on. This will be, even in the way people get back to life, will take some time. People are naturally worried about catching the infection. People will perhaps be more cautious. So it might take a little bit of time for things to get back to normal and people to get the confidence. And of course, the really optimistic people say, once we know for sure it's definitely over, it'll be boom time, because people want to make up for all this hardship that everyone's gone through, and the ability to go and meet people again and to socialize again and go to bars again and go to pubs and go to restaurants and just be that wonderful world we took for granted again. we're going to have a boom time, which is what happened, if you remember, in the 20s, after the First World War and after the Spanish flu epidemic. There was a boom time before the Depression in 1929 started. So that is another scenario. So there are all these possible scenarios that could take place. But I would not hope on a switch on, everything gets back to normal overnight. And the V-shaped recovery that the OBR is predicting, again, many people think that's being far too optimistic. It's more likely to be a U-shaped recovery than a V-shaped recovery.
Okay, the next question is from Claudia. I own a small cleaning business that I started in October 2019. Would I be eligible for any help at all?
With a small cleaning business, if your bank, again, if you've only started in October, you will not have filed any accounts. So if you've got any premises as a cleaning business, which is unlikely, you're probably going to people's premises to do your work. So you can't get any of the rates relief, or you can't get any of the rates grants that are available from the only hope there is that we're again trying to say to the government that there are people who need grants. There are businesses that need grants that do not actually are not eligible for any of the schemes that you have in place at the moment. Businesses like yours. You can't get the self-employed because you will not have filed a tax return because you started in October. So in your case, it's going to be very, very difficult, I'm afraid, to get help under these schemes. But we are trying to ask the government to provide grant schemes. Because again, the essence of all this, and to your question, Claudia, this has not happened through any fault of yours. You had a business, you started in October. We should give credit to you for doing that, for creating employment, for working hard, for providing a service. Your own, your business has come to a standstill. So, if you can just be helped to survive through this bit, get through, and then you can provide your service again. And that's the tragedy of the situation at the moment, and it's really tough.
The next question is from Filippo. Is the government working on any programs to help entrepreneurs start new businesses in London? Relevant examples, government grants to help support hospitality businesses that are planning to launch this summer.
Well, all the support schemes that exist are still there. They haven't gone away. But at the moment, the support that is, if you want to start a business now, I mean, I started Cobra Beer in a recession. When we started in 1990, it was the middle of a recession. Interest rates then had gone up to 15%. So not only was it impossible to borrow money, when you did borrow money, it was really expensive, and you had a recession on. Now, this is much worse than any scenario you could ever imagine. So to start a business now in the hospitality industry would be a very, you have to wait for the hospitality industry to open up. So there's nothing to stop you from getting your plans together, talking to people about what you want to do, and getting ready to get your business started when the hospitality industry opens up. In terms of any help, whatever help there is should be available online in terms of government help, any mentoring advice, any of the startup help schemes, and then many of them exist. The entrepreneur networks that exist, tap into them like you are today. You will find you can get a lot of help in that way. But monetary help, I'm not sure how much monetary help you're going to get at this stage in that situation.
Okay, the next one is anonymous again. It says, how long do you think it will be before new beverage startups who are at concept stage can start progressing again? Which areas should be focused on over time if drink manufacturers are unable to produce?
Well, the manufacturers can produce. So, but if I use my example, my joint venture partners, Molson Coors with Cobra, are the biggest brewers in Britain. We have breweries around the countries. The ones that are producing just draft beer, so our craft brewery, for example, we produce Cobra Malabar, our India Pale Ale, the blonde IPA. We make that in Burtonwood breweries in the northwest near Liverpool. The draft beer can only be sold through a restaurant. You can't sell it in a supermarket. So we can't. There's no production going on over there. At the giant brewery in Burton-upon-Trent, again, there's no keg beer production, but we can produce our bottles. But it's reduced production because a lot of our staff, for safety reasons, over a certain age, are not working. And because of the social distancing, our production can't work at the phenomenal speeds that we normally work at with a state-of-the-art manufacturing plant. We're just doing our best to produce as much as we can to fulfill the supermarkets. So anyone who is producing at the moment will be struggling to just cope with what they can do to supply the retail trade with challenged circumstances. So in terms of new product development and doing trials and pilot plants in a big setup will be difficult. But if you can do any experimentation, do any product development, and have access to that, and there are some breweries who be willing to do that, or drinks companies willing to do that for you, there's no harm exploring that, where you might be able to get started in that aspect. And you can do market research, you can do online research, you can start talking to customers and potential customers, have Zoom meetings and test out your ideas. There's nothing to stop you doing all that.
Okay, the next one, you mentioned that you almost lost your business 3 times in the past. What were the causes of this almost happening?
The 3 times were all very different, going back to 1998 when we had a boycott because of an article written in a trade magazine which upset the restaurant industry very understandably. The editor wrote it in a way that really upset the industry. And I was a publisher. I had a big share in this magazine. It was the first trade magazine for the sector. It was a very useful magazine for the whole sector. And we had a boycott for a year. It took a year for the boycott to be lifted, and I nearly lost my business then. The next time was when we ramped up taken private equity money, and we had grown significantly from 2006. It came to 2008, we needed to raise more money, and we managed to get the biggest drinks company in the world to invest in us and take a minority stake. And we'd run out of money, but we had this money coming in. 2 weeks before Lehman's went bust, they pulled out. And we nearly lost the company then. Luckily, I managed to get a loan from a large Indian bank and was able to save the company. And the third time was during the financial crisis, when by now our biggest financial backer forced us to put our company up for sale. And we tried to sell the company during the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, the worst time we could ever try and sell the company. And fortunately, in March the following year, 2009, Molson Coors came and said that they would form a joint venture with us, and we had to restructure the whole company to form that joint venture. In the midst of all that, a creditor put in a demand to close down the company, and I nearly lost it at that time. We were able to save the company through a very painful restructuring process and save the brand and survive. And the three incidents, I've just summarized them very quickly, 3 very different situations which I could not have predicted. But the things that got me through them were all the same. One was having a strong brand. The Cobra brand was very resilient through all these 3 situations. The sales never dropped. The sales growth may drop, but the sales didn't drop. Second thing was the support of my loyal team members and my family. And my wife, who I met a year after I started Cobra, stood by me throughout. And the loyalty of my team members like Samson Sahel, who was one of my senior directors, who's been with me for over 25 years through all the ups and downs, and is a legend in the industry. And the third thing was always behaving with integrity and following the principle that it's better to fail doing the right thing than to succeed doing the wrong thing. So strong brand, the support of your team and your family, and behaving with integrity and the right values are what got me through my 3 times that I nearly lost my business. Thank you for that question.
The next question is anonymous. What if I'm willing to provide a personal guarantee for the remaining 20%? Would the banks be allowed to accept this under the CBILS?
Banks cannot ask for a personal guarantee if they're lending you under £250,000. The other change the government made is, first, the banks are trying to get you to look at their other products before resorting to the Siebels government guarantee scheme. The government said, no, you as a business don't have to go for any of the other products, usually more expensive. You can go straight for the government guarantee loan scheme. And remember that scheme for the under 45 million, the first year you do not pay any interest or any fees. So from a cash flow point of view, not only do you get that money now, so let's say you want £100,000, you get the £100,000 now, but you don't have to pay interest for a year either. So it really is a great help and you have 6 years to pay it off. If it's done through an overdraft or through invoice finance, it's 3 years, but if it's done as a loan, it's over 6 years. So that's a long period of time over which to pay it off. So the government says you can go straight for that loan. And if the loan is under £250,000, the bank cannot ask for a guarantee. So there's no question of personal guarantee. If the person who's asking me the question wants to borrow more than £250,000, it's only the 20% above the £250,000 that you would be liable, that they can ask you for a personal guarantee.
Next one comes from Adrian. I own a small corporate events company that has been running profitably for 6 years. I come under self-employed status and I've read that I will be contacted personally to apply for financial support from the government. Is this scheme already up and running?
So could you just repeat that question? I didn't catch the detail. Could you please repeat it?
No problem. I own a small corporate events company that has been running profitably for 6 years. I come under self-employed status and I've read that I will be contacted personally to apply for financial support from the government. Is this scheme already up and running?
Yes, it is. So the self-employed is very much up and running, and you would be entitled to claim the equivalent of the employee scheme, up to £2,500 a month, or 80%, and its profits up to £50,000. So if you filed your tax return for last year, and they extended the filing deadline for filing your tax return, normally it's the 31st of January, so you had an extension to file your tax return, you would very much be entitled to get that help up to a maximum of £2,500 per month for the 3 months, or 80%.
The next question comes from Philip. Will the pressure that you plan to put on the insurance companies have traction? We have been told that we are not covered. Should the government step in to enforce a strict interpretation of terms?
And this is a very difficult one, because I spoke at an insurance company event earlier this year in the City of London. And if you look at our country, we have the best of the best in just about every sector. And I mentioned our pharmaceutical companies, the best in the world. Our manufacturing is state of the art. In every aspect, this country has world-class capability. Our universities, along with America, the best in the world. When it comes to the insurance industry, our insurance industry, whether it's the reinsurance, whether it's the Lloyd's insurance, reinsurance market, whether it's our giant insurance companies that exist over here, our broking system, we have phenomenal insurance capability in this country. And I think this is a time when insurance companies, of course, are going to have lots and lots of claims made, and it's very difficult for them. And they've naturally got to pay out, from their point of view, as little as they can. And they will do everything they can not to pay out. And unfortunately, and we know this even before this crisis, with insurance companies, if you're excluded from that policy, they will not pay out. And you have companies who've got pandemic insurance and a list of different diseases. And of course, COVID-19 is not there because it didn't exist until December. And so they don't get because if they have a list of pandemics, they don't get it. On the other hand, if you have an open pandemic, you should be able to claim. Then you have business interruption policy, and they'll say the exclusions for business interruption policy. My advice is you work through your brokers and you put pressure on the insurance company saying, this is a time for the reputation of the insurance industry. Please, if it's a gray area, give us the benefit of the doubt and pay out. And the government is also putting pressure on the insurance companies to take this attitude, quite understanding the pressure they themselves as an insurance industry are under, which we've always got to appreciate.
Okay, the next question. Any advice or guidance for LTD business directors who most get their income from dividends which aren't covered by self-employed scheme? It appears you're not allowed to furlough yourself.
If you're a director of company, you can furlough yourself. There's no restriction to that. But then you need to be on the PAYE to be able to furlough. If you're getting income through dividends, that unfortunately is an issue. And you can't, if your income is purely dividends, then you can't be on furlough. And then it will be the other help that you can try and get for your business, whether it's any of the rates grants or any of the deferrals. And by the way, HMRC are being very understanding from all the reports I'm getting where you say, I want to delay my taxes. And they are allowing you to delay your taxes, let alone the VAT delay that you're allowed to for 1 quarter, let alone the filing of the self-employed from July to January. They're also saying any other taxes, please, if we need some help, delay to pay taxes. They're being very understanding and giving. So try and get all those advantages you can, and work with your accountants and work with your lawyers.
The next one is from Joe. I have a small business that builds personal brands for high-profile founders and CEOs. Lots of our clients have asked to pause or cancel our campaigns due to the crisis. Do you have any advice to keep afloat? New business is difficult as it isn't a priority for most people, and hanging on to existing clients is tough as companies are cutting all non-essential costs.
And this is, I'm afraid, one of the sad realities of the situation now, where most companies, what will they do? The first thing they will cut is their marketing budget. And anything related to marketing will usually be the first thing cut. And of course, you think about it, if you've got no sales, well you haven't got any income. So what's the point of marketing? It's a short-term view, and it's a survival view that the companies take. And of course, you would say in the long term, this is temporary. We're going to be out of this, whether it's in a few months, whether it's in a year, or whether it's years, we're going to be out of this. So surely as a long term, you've got to try and protect your brand. You've got to make sure of your image, because you're going to need that in the end. And that is what, please forgive my daughter, one of my daughters walked past the back. So it's a long term. You've got to try and persuade your clients to look long term and say, look, this is in your interest to make sure that you keep this. But I'm afraid there are many, many companies who are just cutting anything they can in their marketing budgets. And it is short term, but then people are trying to survive at this stage.
Okay, we're going to get one last question in quickly. This is anonymous. Do you think VCs will still have an appetite to invest in small startup food brands, even if they've had to halt operating due to coronavirus?
It just cracked up then. In small, what sort of brands did you say?
Startup food brands.
Food brands. Okay. I think that VCs will be willing to invest in everything once they have the confidence to invest. And they will have the confidence to invest once the uncertainty of where we're headed starts to unfold and disappear. So the moment there is more certainty. So if one of the things happen, for example, if these drug trials are successful, and you have drugs that will work in helping to stop this virus, whether it's at the viral stage or the inflammation stage, and save lives, that will give people the confidence for the economy to start opening up. That one factor alone could help a lot in the economy opening up. The capacity of the NHS was a big worry going into this, because we felt we didn't have the capacity. We've now shown with a collaborative way, we've been able to set up these Nightingale hospitals at scale. We've been able, the NHS has adapted within the existing hospitals to create more critical beds. And of course, please remember our hospital capacity. Germany has 3 times more beds per capita than we do. So looking ahead, I think the lessons we learned from this crisis, we've got to invest more in our critical care capacity, in our PPE, and got to have this capacity looking forward. In our care sector, it's going to be much more of a priority than it has been. So once you have that, right now, if we're worried about a second wave coming up and we know we've got the hospital capacity and the critical care capacity, that's another uncertainty that people will be worried about, they'll be less worried about. So the more this uncertainty goes, if we can flatten this curve and show a decline in infection going well below 0, and you know that the disease is not spreading, then that gives people more confidence. So once that confidence returns, then the investment will start to return, and there'll be lots of opportunities to invest. And I'm very optimistic. Once we're out of this, we inherently have a very strong economy. We have great businesses. We have great skills. We have great institutions. We have great capability as a country. So once the uncertainty goes, we will be able to get on with it, and we will do very well, not just in this country, but on the global stage. and we're showing to do it with the right values and a country coming together and the community spirit that's come out of it. And if I just conclude with so are we concluding now? Is this concluding now, or were you going to say something after this?
I'll hand over to you first, and then we can come back to me. That's no problem.
And there are no more questions, are there?
There are a few, but we're out of time, unfortunately. So
Okay.
I'll hand over to you for now.
So I'm just going to conclude. It's been a real pleasure being with all of you. I've tried to be as realistic as possible. I'm as most entrepreneurs, inherently optimistic, but one I think has to be cautious and realistic in this situation. I hope I've been able to convey that to you, and I wish you all the best. It's a horrible, horrible time, the most challenging time for everybody, for all of us. And a professor of mine who I worked with at the London Business School and then taught me at Harvard Business School, where I am an alumnus through executive education, Professor John Quelch, who's now head of the business school in Miami. He sent me an email and said, these are his 7 C's of leadership during a crisis. And the 7 C's are: 1, calm; 2, confidence; 3, communicate; 4, collaborate; 5, community; 6, compassion; and 7, cash. All the very best to you. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Lord Billamore, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and for answering our attendees' questions. You've been absolutely brilliant. If there is anything you'd like to catch up on from today's webinar, we will be sending out a replay coming shortly on our social media channels. Our next webinar in the Business COVID-19 series takes place on Wednesday, the 22nd of April at 2 o'clock, and we'll be joined by serial entrepreneur and investor Lara Morgan, who will be talking about well-being routines, recovery thoughts, and thinking ahead with a positive outlook. If you haven't already, you can register for the webinars at freshbusinessthinking.haysummit.com or click the link in the comments. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you again, Lord Billamore.
Thank you very much.